Tucker Carlson over the weekend was spotted by a member of the Russian public or somebody in Russia attending the Bolshoi Ballet, which is located in Moscow. Now, the Bolshoi Ballet, you may have thought from hearing the commentary that ensued, is not actually a gulag where some of the worst human rights abuses take place, but instead is one of the high cultural points of planet Earth, of the human species. The Bolshoi Ballet is the pinnacle of the art form of ballet, and Moscow, for anyone who has visited, is filled with all kinds of amazing and inspiring architecture and high culture and a very rich history from a country that has been around for many, many centuries with a very storied history. It's a country that Americans have always visited. It's a country where American journalists have always gone to interview Russian leaders, including at the height of the Cold War when the Soviet Union was the United States' #1 enemy. And yet, Tucker Carlson's visit to Russia, his appearance physically in Moscow, as well as the rumor that he has gone there with the intention of interviewing Vladimir Putin, something that every journalist worth that title would be eager to do, to interview any world leader, is one of the high points of a journalist's career. It's always a vital public service, especially when Washington is now trying to convince Americans to send another $60 billion to a country that Russia is at war with in order to basically fight a proxy war against that country. We should, of course, want to hear from Russian leaders and should want to hear questions that come from an American perspective, which, if Tucker is going to do that interview, is certainly something that you would expect him to ask about. The idea that we wouldn't want to hear that we would somehow be harmed if we hear an interview from a lifelong American journalist who has worked at basically every media outlet in the United States of a leader of a country that's one of the largest and most influential in the world, is madness. And yet, not only are we being told that this event is threatening the United States and to Americans and that it's somehow a sinister act, many prominent liberal and neocon elites, and that's basically a repetitive phrase at this point. The overlap between neoconservatives and liberals is almost full and complete. Basically, neocons are the thought leaders of the Democratic Party when it comes to foreign policy, and what they are pronouncing is that Tucker Carlson is guilty of the crime of treason. Treason. Even though the United States is not actually at war with Russia, there's no congressional authorization to use military force against Russia, there's no declaration of war against Russia, which is the bare minimum needed to be guilty of, quote, aiding and abetting an enemy of the United States, which is the constitutional definition of the crime of treason. They're using this term, treason and traitor, earnestly, literally. Some are even arguing, I'm talking about recognizable names in American politics, that Tucker Carlson should be banned from re-entering the country, even though he's an American citizen and has the obvious constitutional right to re-enter the country. And there's even been some viral tweets suggesting that he ought to be murdered by Ukrainian forces while in Moscow. Now, that shouldn't surprise anybody who's been paying attention to the mentality of Ukraine supporters and the militias that dominate Ukraine. This story made it to The Guardian, the British newspaper, earlier today, and they're taking quite seriously this idea that something sinister has occurred. It's kind of ironic. I actually went to Moscow when I worked at The Guardian as a reporter to interview Edward Snowden. They've sent their own reporters to interview Vladimir Putin and to interview Edward Snowden and others in Russia. It's what journalists do. And yet now they seem to be suggesting that anyone who goes to Russia as a journalist, either to visit the Bolshoi Ballet or to see the sights of Moscow, or even to potentially interview the Russian president, is somehow engaged in malevolent acts. Here's the headline from The Guardian, quote, Kremlin quiet as Tucker Carlson's Russia visit creates Putin interview rumors. The far-right broadcaster spotted at the Bolshoi Ballet in Moscow, having reportedly arrived last week. Quote, the Kremlin has declined to say whether Vladimir Putin would grant an interview to Tucker Carlson, the far-right American journalist, after the former Fox News presenter was spotted in Moscow. Carlson was the most popular host at Fox News before he was abruptly fired last April. Now let's stop there for a second. And let us recall that to this day, almost a year later, Fox News has provided no explanation, even to its own viewers, as to why Tucker Carlson was fired from Fox. To me, there has never been any doubt about why. It is because he is a dissident of Republican establishment orthodoxy. Tucker did not spend most of his time on Fox criticizing the Democratic Party. He spent most of his time criticizing the Republican establishment, people like Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, Paul Ryan, Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham. He had contempt for them. And the Murdochs, it's well known, have long supported the pre-Trump establishment party and want to bring the Republican Party back in line with that pre-Trump ideology. And what made a lot of establishment Republicans particularly furious about Tucker, and when he was fired, they anonymously celebrated like the little rats that they are, running around in those sewers underneath the Capitol, meeting with reporters, maligning Tucker, but only anonymously. They don't have the courage to use the real name. And they were saying essentially that they were happy he was fired because now their lives would be much easier sending American money to Ukraine now that they don't have the most influential voice and most trustworthy voice among American conservatives opposing the war. I firmly believe that the reason he was fired is because he was using this gigantic platform, the biggest on Fox, not to disseminate establishment Republican orthodoxy, but critiquing it and opposing it. And whatever else the Murdochs are, capitalist and billionaires, they are also highly politicized actors. Remember, it was Rupert Murdoch who funded the Weekly Standard, the magazine long run by Bill Kristol during the War on Terror, to push neocon ideology. And if Tucker hates anything, he hates neocons. The Guardian went on, quote, since leaving, he has used X, formerly Twitter, to distribute a right-wing talk show. How many times are they going to use the word right-wing in this article? It's now 3 times. We're not even past the first paragraph. Everything is designed to signify to the readers what to think and what to feel using these labels. To distribute a right-wing talk show, Tucker on X. Carlson has since echoed many of the Kremlin's talking points in its war against Ukraine, slamming Washington for its support of Ukraine while suggesting the West is to blame for the invasion. Now, this is, I think, one of the most insidious themes that has entered our discourse. And actually, it's been around for a long time. The idea that if you oppose the involvement of the United States in a foreign war, it means you are automatically on the other side, that you are a supporter of whoever the United States wants to go to war with. And that you are spouting the talking points of America's enemies simply by virtue of opposing the war. Because obviously it's always in the interest of whatever country the U.S. wants to go to war with for someone in the United States to stand up and say, I don't want my country involved in this war. I don't want my country financing this war against that country. And this framework that they are imposing, namely that if you oppose the war in Ukraine and having the United States pay for it, you're somehow echoing Kremlin talking points, is so malignant. This is what was done to people who opposed the war in Vietnam, that you were serving the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese communist leader because you were opposed to the U.S. war in Vietnam. If you were against the U.S. war in Iraq, the invasion of Iraq, you were pushing Saddam Hussein talking points because Saddam Hussein was saying it's an illegal and unjust invasion. And if you were an American saying that too, you were echoing Saddam Hussein's talking points. Same with the effort to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. If you wanted your country not to do that, you got accused of being a pro-Assad propagandist. Same with the attempt to change the regime in Libya. If you were opposed to that, somehow you were echoing Muammar Gaddafi's interests. Wanting the U.S. to withdraw from Afghanistan meant you were pushing the Taliban agenda and the Russian agenda. Do you see what they've done? They've made it so that any dissent to U.S. foreign policy, especially the U.S. policy of endless wars, which enriches the large corporations that fund both parties automatically makes you a traitor. Means that you are espousing the talking points of this other country. Now, Tucker had said so many times that he knew almost nothing about Russia. He had no interest in Russia. He had never been until this trip. And his opposition to the U.S. funding of the war in Ukraine was based on his view that he has espoused many other times that the United States should not be funding foreign wars, especially when it has no interest in the American people. That's a common view in American political life. If you poll Americans and ask, are we fighting too many wars? Should we be the world's policemen? Overwhelmingly, Americans will say no. This is a neocon tactic to say that if you oppose American wars, then you're on the other side. You're a traitor to the United States. You're echoing the talking points of America's enemies. But it's now in places like The Guardian, a liberal outlet, because American liberals, Western liberals on the one hand, and neocons on the other have completely merged. They have the same exact mindset, the same exact agenda. And so this attempt to equate dissent to your government's war policies with treason used to be confined to the provinces of the lowest level, scummiest neocons, and now it is standard establishment liberal discourse, which increasingly is the sector of American politics pushing new Western wars. Quote, in his shows on Fox News and X, Carlson has described the Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, as a, quote, dictator and, quote, sweaty and rat-like, while once stating that he was rooting for Moscow. His pro-Putin and anti-Ukrainian rhetoric has been lauded in Moscow, where his clips have become a fixture on Russian state television, with local propagandists using them as evidence that influential people in the U.S. are sympathetic to Putin's military campaign. That is such a lie, that people who are opposed to U.S. financing of Ukraine's war are sympathetic to Putin's military campaign. My view has always been very clear, namely that I don't think the Russian invasion of Ukraine is justified, but I also think the United States helped provoke it and should not be paying to prolong that war. We're just sending Ukrainians to their death, Ukrainians conscripts, not Ukrainian volunteers, for just some abstract effort to weaken the country of Russia. And it's consistent with my view in every other war that the United States finances. It's not confined to Russia. But this is because Western liberal elites view the war in Ukraine as sacrosanct. They have made it so that everybody who questions that war is a traitor to the West. Quote, Carlson recently claimed he previously tried to interview the Russian president, but was, quote, stopped by the U.S. government. Now, do you see how they say Carlson claimed this? Carlson recently claimed. So, is it true? The Guardian really tries to imply that he was almost lying. He just claimed it like it was some baseless, crazy conspiracy theory. They have no interest in whether or not it's true. They should. They should have a lot of interest in whether or not the United States government acted to intervene in a journalist attempt to interview the Russian president. It would be a pretty severe threat to a free press, something the Guardian pretends to claim to care about. We reported it at the time. I know what happened in this case. It's absolutely true. The evidence that the NSA had spied on Tucker Carlson while attempting to arrange an interview with the Russian president while he was at Fox News is extremely persuasive and conclusive, in fact. And yet, because it was Tucker Carlson, and because most people in American journalism, as we're now seeing, think that a journalist should not go and interview this foreign leader, even though prior to Trump, it had been a basic tradition of American journalism to go and interview every foreign leader you can get your hands on, including America's most devoted enemies. The most prominent journalists in the United States have always done that, and for good reason. You want to hear from those people. You want to confront them with questions that you want to hear them answer. But now we are so drowning in this kind of neocon ideology that you don't question your government's wars. You just sit and applaud. And the last thing you do is let the countries they want to go to war with be heard. They have no interest in whether or not the U.S. government tried to impede Tucker Carlson from interviewing Vladimir Putin, because I'm sure they actually think that that's what the proper role of the U.S. government is. Here is Tucker Carlson in 2021 explaining exactly what happened.
The largest intelligence gathering agency, the NSA, had been reading my private emails. Even saying that out loud is weird. It's one of those segments we never thought we would do ever. But the country has changed that much that fast. And honestly, the whole thing was kind of shocking. The government was spying on us? Come on. It seemed crazy. But it's true. And no one in Washington appeared to be shocked in the slightest. In fact, the usual shills right after our segment had a ready explanation for it. Either it never happened at all, they said, just a cable news show lying for ratings, or there must have been a good reason it happened. And they began furiously making excuses for why the NSA did it. A powerful, heavily politicized spy agency surveilling journalists who've been critical of the regime? No problem. It's perfectly normal. Just don't call it spying. But it's not normal at all. It is third world. And as we told you repeatedly, it did happen. Now that has been confirmed. Yesterday we learned that sources in the so-called intelligence community told at least one reporter in Washington what was in those emails, my emails. There was nothing scandalous in there, thank God. We're happy to report that. Late this spring, I contacted a couple of people I thought could help get us an interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin. I told nobody I was doing this other than my executive producer, Justin Wells. I wasn't embarrassed about trying to interview Putin. He's obviously newsworthy. I'm an American citizen. I can interview anyone I want, and I plan to. But still, in this case, I decided to keep it quiet. I figured that any kind of publicity would rattle the Russians and make the interview less likely to happen. But the Biden administration found out anyway by reading my emails. I learned from a whistleblower that the NSA planned to leak the contents of those emails to media outlets. Why would they do that? Well, the point, of course, was to paint me as a disloyal American, a Russian operative, been called that before, a stooge of the Kremlin, a traitor doing the bidding of a foreign adversary. And of course, I'm hardly the only person who's been accused of those things in the last several years. We've seen this movie several times now. At the same moment, the communist Chinese government increases its already stunning level of control over this country, our leaders prattle on about the threat of Vladimir Putin. He's an evildoer, they tell us, a totalitarian dictator. Vladimir Putin does things that no American leader would even consider. He runs domestic disinformation campaigns. He lies to the public. He punishes people for opposing him or for believing the wrong things. He even uses intelligence agencies to spy on his own citizens. Beyond the pale stuff. So no decent American would interview Vladimir Putin, at least no reporter from Fox News. That was the point they wanted to make. That's why they planned to leak the contents of my emails to news organizations. And yesterday, as noted, we learned they actually did it. Even now, some in the media are claiming that we deserve this. Emailing with people who know Putin, are you? Of course the NSA is watching you. That's what you get.
Now, this was 8 full years after we did the reporting enabled by our source, Edward Snowden. And right before we began that reporting, the Justice Department under Eric Holder had been caught spying on multiple American journalists, including James Rosen of Fox News and 2 reporters at the Associated Press. And a big part of our reporting was that the NSA had been abusing its spying mechanisms designed to identify threats to the United States, and instead was spying on all kinds of American citizens with no warrants, including American journalists. And the fact of the matter is that people inside the government confirmed to Tucker Carlson exactly what the content of his emails were. And then they leaked them to the media. Proof that they were in fact spying on his emails as he tried to arrange an interview. I would be surprised if you even remember that because of how little media attention it received. And the reason is that they, as he said, they think it's warranted. And if you doubt that, look at the reaction to the news that Tucker visited Russia, was seen physically in Moscow. Hear from the weepy former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, who knew better than to seek re-election and ran into the arms of CNN. He was responding to a report that read, quote, Tucker Carlson has been in Moscow for the past 3 days, according to Russia's MASH outlet. He was spotted at the Bolshoi Theater today. And there you see a picture of him with the very storied seats at the Bolshoi Ballet, which I've been to. It's extremely beautiful. If you have a chance, by all means, go there and see it. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't want to? And in response, Adam Kinzinger, who has the flags of two foreign countries in the United States in his bio, the American flag, the Ukrainian flag, and the Israeli flag. So America and the two countries whose wars we're currently financing, with the long-term fascist phrase Slava Ukrainia, which has been repeated by Nancy Pelosi and all of bipartisan Washington. In response to this news, Adam Kinzinger said, quote, he is a traitor for going to Russia and appearing at the Bolshoi Ballet. Do you see how completely deranged these people are? And again, Adam Kinzinger was in the Congress for several terms and then knew he couldn't be reelected within the Republican Party. He avoided Liz Cheney's fate of losing by a record-setting 36 points in her own primary, booted out by Wyoming Republicans who have been voting for the Cheney family for decades. And he avoided that fate and ran into the loving, comforting arms of CNN, where he's now an analyst. So CNN employs somebody who accuses an American journalist of being a traitor for the crime of visiting a foreign country with the potential that he might actually be conducting an interview with a foreign leader. Think how demented that is. Here is Alexander Vindman, the hero who stood up to Donald Trump by leaking the contents of the phone call that led to his first unsuccessful impeachment, had been celebrated by American culture as this hero. Real whistleblowers end up like Julian Assange or Edward Snowden, in exile or in prison. They don't end up writing best-selling books and appearing on Curb Your Enthusiasm and being applauded by every major corporate network without ever being prosecuted for anything. He's never suffered anything, Alexander Vindman. He's not a hero, he's a coward. And he's Ukrainian, an American Ukrainian, and has been obsessed with having the United States and American citizens who are hardworking pay for Ukraine's war. And here's what he said in response to the news that Tucker Carlson committed the crime of visiting Russia. Quote, Tucker is aiding and abetting the enemy. The same enemy that threatens us with nuclear weapons, interferes in our election, allies with Iran, North Korea, and Hamas. This is who Tucker courts. Again, by no stretch of the imagination, in any legal or constitutional sense, is Russia an American enemy. You're allowed to visit Russia. You're allowed to interview whoever you want in Moscow. It's not against the law by any reasonable interpretation. These people are absolutely deranged. This is what authoritarianism looks like. This is the mindset of authoritarianism. That says if you visit a country, you're a traitor to your own. Or if you're a journalist and you want to interview a foreign leader, you're somehow guilty of the most serious crime in the US Code for which capital punishment is applied. Here was a viral tweet by a vehement supporter of Ukraine and really a basic American liberal who said the following: if Tucker Carlson is in Moscow as the guest of Vladimir Putin, I think that makes him a valid Ukrainian military target. No, there you see it was retweeted by 2,000 people, liked by 16,000. Now, this person is a coward calling for the murder of other people while hiding behind anonymity. I mean, think of an act more cowardly than that. It's almost hard to imagine. But this is their mindset, these people who support Ukraine and have aligned with these neo-Nazi militias in Ukraine. I've been put on lists issued by the Ukrainian intelligence calling me a pro-Russian propagandist because I don't think my country should be fueling that war with American money, along with a bunch of other people in media and politics. This is how authoritarian these war supporters are. Here is Guy Verhofstadt, who is a longtime official in the EU, And there you see his bio. He's president of the European Movement International. He says, hashtag I am European with the EU flag, Europe, everything is Europe. I believe he used to be the Prime Minister of Belgium. I'll check that. But he was also, so he's a member of the European Parliament, which is what MEP is. But I believe he used to be, if I'm not mistaken, the Prime Minister of Belgium and then a high official in the EU. But he's a member of the EU Parliament, and he's a vehement supporter of the war in Ukraine. And he has this picture of, again, Tucker Carlson committing the war crime of visiting a ballet, the Bolshoi Ballet. And in response to this picture, he says, quote, Tucker Carlson is surely on the path to being labeled a propagandist for the Russian regime. If he enables disinformation for Putin, the EU should explore a travel ban. They're going to exclude American citizens who pay for their defense, Europe's, because he went and interviewed a foreign leader and because he opposes the American-EU war in Ukraine. They want to exclude him from any country in the EU. These people constantly portray themselves as the guardians against authoritarianism when in reality they are the supreme perpetrators of it. Speaking of neocon scumbags, the supreme one, Bill Kristol, obviously reacted to this story as well and said, quote, perhaps we need a total and complete shutdown of Tucker Carlson re-entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what is going on. Now, obviously, he's mocking Trump's formulation when he announced his ban on citizens of certain Muslim countries during the 2016 campaign. But he's also very seriously arguing that Tucker Carlson should be banned from re-entering the United States. Something that would be blatantly unconstitutional. But even the mere suggestion of it shows how, I can't express how completely unhinged establishment liberal and neocon discourse has become. These people are warmongers. Joe Biden, lest we forget, is the president who came after Donald Trump. Donald Trump involved the United States in no new wars. He inherited the war against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. He escalated that war and then pulled out, although he tried to pull out of Syria and generals basically ignored the order and got celebrated for it by the media, even though it's a complete subversion of civilian rule in the United States. And then Biden inherited the presidency and that state of affairs from Trump, and Biden has involved the United States in 3 new wars, heavily involved, or 4, depending on how you count. The war in Ukraine, which we've given $120 billion to, and now proposed another $60 billion proposed by Joe Biden. We're paying for Israel's war to destroy Gaza. We are bombing Yemen repeatedly now with no congressional authorization, something we weren't doing before 2022, or as of 2022. And the United States is now involved in an escalated Middle East war, bombing multiple sites in Syria and Iraq. So it's either 3 new wars or 4 new wars. A new Mideast war, financing Israel's war in Gaza, and financing and being heavily involved in the war in Ukraine. Joe Biden's going to run for your election almost certainly with 3 new wars waging that he got the United States involved in. And these people believe that if you oppose any of that, if you question any of it, you become an American traitor. It's just repressive by definition. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.